Alright, so we have gathered on one side, and you can see how I did the vertical gathering on one side. And what I decided to do was show you all how the gathering process works, just so you can know some, you know, do's and don'ts. If you're looking at this and you're kind of seeing all this little fray here, don't worry. Once we hem everything and stitch everything in, that fray will go away. And then if you're ever worried about your fabric fraying, you can buy fray block to put on it, and it keeps it from fraying. It's just a little liquid that goes on it to keep it from fraying. So like I said, what we're going to do is show you how to do the vertical gathering, and I'm going to do it on this side here that is still not gathered. See? Still see up under it. My stitch is on a 3, which is a not too short of a stitch, not too long of a stitch, and not even in between, is more toward the short side. So that's a normal stitch for me, a 3. However, when you get ready to do a gathering stitch, you want to move it as far over as you possibly can. So I'm moving mine from a 3 to a 7. Now it may vary depending upon, you know, what type of sewing machine you have, but you always want to try to get it on the biggest stitch when you're doing a gathering. The next thing you want to do is just lay it down at the very end of the stitch. So I'm going on the wrong side. It really doesn't matter because my this thread is going to be hidden anyway once I do it. But you want to make sure that you hem, or that you sew the part that's going to be gathered. So this section is going to be gathered, which is my top overlay, and I'm just gonna hit my release button. And I'm going to run my stitch all the way up. I'm going to trim my thread to cut it loose. Now if you notice, I have my gathering stitch. My gathering stitch is going to be much wider than a normal stitch will be, and if you notice, my normal stitch is going to be very small, but my gathering stitch is going to be a wide stitch. That's because it doesn't stitch it as tight, so that you can do things like gather or pull it apart if you need to. Now the next thing that I do is, if you look at the end, on either end you should have a piece of string where you began and where you ended sticking out. You can take either one of those, and I'm just going to take the end piece and separate it from the back piece, and all I do is just take it and pull it, and see how it starts to gather it? Pull. Now one thing you don't want to do when you're pulling, yes, you can buy expensive, really tough thread, but unless it's steel, it's gonna break if you pull it too hard. So if you notice, when you're pulling, I try to wrap mine around my finger so it doesn't pull back, but I'm still gentle with it. I pull a little, and then I push the gathering down, so it's going all the way down to the other end, so I have an even gather when I finish. Pull and slide, pull and slide. And in this case, what I'm trying to do is match up the top piece, which is bigger, to the bottom piece. And if you notice, I got a little bit more that I need to gather before I'll have a nice even distribution. I'm gonna check it to see if it's nice and even, and if it's nice and even, I mean, if it's too much gathering, you can always come back and readjust it. Alright, so I got a nice even layout, which basically means that's just how nice and even it's gonna, I mean, that means that it's gonna match the bottom part. And then what I'm gonna do is sew right along this line right here, right up under it, to hide that stitch. Now one thing I did not mention is, when you go from your gathering stitch to your regular stitch, always remember to take it back from a 7 to a 3 in my case. So I started out with the 3. I wanted to make a bigger stitch. I moved it to a 7. Now I want to make sure that my stitch stays, so I'm going to move it back from a 7 to a 3. And the stitch is going to be smaller. Make sure you take your time so that you don't break your needle. Alright. And if you notice, when I finish, I have a gather in the middle, pokel in the middle like it should be, and I have it gathered on both sides. And that's how you do a vertical gather. The same thing about a vertical gather. The same rules apply when you're doing a horizontal gather. You still do your gathering stitch, you still pull it, and that's it. So we're on the bottom piece now. And on the bottom piece, this right here is the waistline that you're actually looking at. But we have 3 pieces. We have this middle piece from here to this end. And then you have 2 pieces like this. Now I've already gone ahead and sewn you on that piece just so you can see how it looks when it finishes. But you see how you have that nice hemline, that nice line where you don't see any ragged edges or anything. That's what we're going to do to the other side. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and we'll get started on this back piece looks. And like I said, you have 2 of these pieces, one of which I've already sewn on. You have the right side, which is the shiny side, and then you have the wrong side. Now when you're sewing to make a perfect hem or a good hem, you always want to sew right side to right side. So this is my big back piece, or my big front piece, and here's the right side of it. Here's the wrong side. What I'm going to do is take my other big piece, or my other back piece, and lay it right side to right side. So I'm going to lay it on top of it, on top of the other piece basically, and line it up hem to hem. Now what I like to do, once I do that, is line up my pieces from end to end. Then take a straight pin and line it up. So when I sew, I don't have to worry about trying to hold the fabric together as well as sewing, because that can get a little tedious sometimes. And you just want to do your straight pins so that they hold the fabric, but they also stay out of your way of sewing. See, that one may get in my way, so I'll readjust it. And then you just keep going all the way down. Until you get to the very end, just like that. And see, that leaves room for me to stitch. And then it keeps the pins in line. And at the same time, it keeps my 2 pieces of fabric in line. So I have completely sewn the last piece that you saw. And as well as that, I sewed both of the 2 back pieces together. So what you see is the full bottom piece minus the lining, the ruffle, and the overlay. This is just the bottom piece, the satin piece. If you notice, I left the top portion of it out, and that is simply for the zipper.
Okay.
All right. And that will be all for now.